Welcome to another program in our series, Freethinking Forum. I am Bill Weir, producer and host, and I'm delighted to have with me today Jay Fishman. Jay,
Hey, thank you.
I've known you now for a couple of decades.
I was going to say far, far too long, but good.
And you have done a fabulous job, I think, in leading the Minnesota Sinfonia.
Well, thank you. This has been, I've been conducting in the Twin Cities for 39 years. This is my 39th year. And this has been a joy that is it's very difficult to describe. You know, the work we do in the community with the kids and with the community, the seniors, those who don't have much money, it's truly a life's mission and one I'm very proud of.
I'd like to get into more depth on that, but let's first establish it's a 501c3 organization.
We are, which means it's tax exempt. Of course, with the new tax laws, you got to check with your accountants and whatever else. But yes, we're open for business and open for.
Yeah. And now, when was it that the orchestra was founded?
We started in 1989, and we had a premise. The premise is that we were going to be a community-based, I almost want to say social service organization, meaning that we wanted to work with, well, the mission statement is perfect. The Minnesota Sinfonia serves the musical and educational needs of the citizens of Minnesota. And then we put a tag with that. That means that we want everyone to come. That means we want parents to bring their children. We want parents and adults in the community to come regardless of what your financial positions are, regardless of what your zip codes are, regardless of how much or how little you know about classical music. We want to be open and available for everyone.
It sure seems that you are. I see a wide variety of people at your concerts.
Well, you know, I'm really proud of that, actually. We do surveys, anonymous surveys at our concerts, and the range is extraordinary. About 30 to 35% of those who respond have household incomes below $35,000. Those same people say that they come to very few other professional arts, none other than the Minnesota Sinfonia. The reason is partly because of cost. The other reasons are that we tell parents to bring their children and grandparents to bring their grandchildren, and they do. And then we play in neighborhoods that are comfortable for them. So we don't play downtown in Minneapolis or downtown in St. Paul at the Ordways and such. We play in communities such as East St. Paul, near the north side of Minneapolis, where people have ready access, where they feel comfortable and they feel they can bring their children.
That is a magnificent mission. And people need to understand there's much more than those public concerts.
Well, there is. I mean, you know, when we started in 1989, I had a couple of goals. One was to do the public concerts, and one is to work in the schools. And this, to me, we started in 1989 with 2 schools. And we knew we were going to do Minneapolis and eventually St. Paul public schools, so inner city schools. We knew that we wanted to tie the program to academics, and we knew we wanted to take the orchestra into the schools proper. And the thinking was twofold, actually threefold. We wanted kids to be introduced to classical music. We wanted to do it in such a way that it would be helpful for the teachers. The teachers could get on board, the principals. And 3, we knew we had to go into the schools because the business of busing and taking kids to downtown is extraordinarily difficult. You have, especially in the winter, you got to get the kids all dressed. You have to get school buses, and it takes an inordinate amount of time and time away from what they have to do in the classroom. So the thinking was, if we could take the orchestra into the schools and play properly in the schools, which means the gymnasiums, then that would be special for the kids. And what I decided early on is we were going to go in tuxedos, in concert dress. We are going to show these kids that they're important, that we feel that our work with them is every bit and actually more important than going to play downtown in the major concert halls.
Yes. So in a way, you're helping these young people begin to understand orchestral music, and when they grow up, they can also enjoy Minnesota Orchestra and St. Paul Chamber Orchestra. How was it to start that Sinfonia in the midst of this powerhouse of music?
Well, when we started, we were primarily a summer orchestra with some winter work. And back in the 80s, there was not a Summerfest. St. Paul Chamber Orchestra never did and still doesn't play in the summer. So there was the niche. And then we did branch out into the winter because we found that there was a need. The need, of course, is, again, the people we serve. Now, the surveys that I mentioned before, half the people go to everything. Half the people have good incomes. They go to Minnesota Orchestra, they go to the Chamber Orchestra, they come to us. And then, as I mentioned before, the other side. And so that essentially only come to us or rarely go to the others. And so you have quite a mix of audience people, and at ages, it's incredible. You have seniors, you have people with, literally with babes in arm. It used to be on the recordings, the quietest part of the concert. A baby would cry.
Now, many people might assume that on this low budget kind of what appears to be low budget.
Oh, it is low.
that the players must be volunteers.
Oh, heavens no.
But I know they're professional.
Well, it's more than they're professional. They're some of the best professional instrumentalists in the state and actually in the region, because on occasion someone will come in from Wisconsin and there's not a whole lot of money. It's a union orchestra, so we're governed by union pay scales and such. But that's a floor. That's not a ceiling. And comparatively speaking to the other major orchestras, what we pay is considerably less. But what we have in this is our musicians that are so dedicated to the mission and to bringing really high quality arts amongst ourselves to the general public, that's what makes this thing go. It's extraordinary.
And so the musicians get paid for the concerts, also the rehearsal?
Oh, for everything. Everything we do, they get paid, of course.
And where do the players come from?
They're from all over. They're the twins. They're the best of the freelance pool of the metropolitan area, which means that we are not connected officially or unofficially with the Minnesota Orchestra, the St. Paul Chamber Orchestra, or anybody else. But there is a big pool of players who also are not regular members of those orchestras, but who want to play. And Minneapolis, St. Paul, this area actually is one of the best freelance pools in the entire country. You know, you have New York, you have Los Angeles because of the films, and then Minnesota is right up there. It's amazing.
Amazing, yes.
Yeah, it's absolutely amazing.
So we are so fortunate to be here with your orchestra and the two others.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the players who are ready to freelance. Mm-hmm. What a wealth. And you've already spoken somewhat of the guiding philosophy of the Minnesota Sinfonia. Is there something more that you'd like to say about that?
Well, actually there is. I mentioned when we started that we wanted to do work in the community with really high-end, high-quality concerts and work with the kids. So that first year, we started something called Music in the Schools. And as I mentioned before, we started with 2 schools. And it's an academic program that's tied to classical music. So every year, we have a different academic theme. So one year is history, one year is literature. This year actually is literature, several science, several math. And so we create a curriculum that's based on state academic standards. So we pick out an academic standard for each grade level, K, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and actually we go up to 8 now. And then we give an activity that comes from the state academic standards of how to help fulfill that standard, that requirement. And then we show how classical music can help bridge that gap. Because, you know, when you go into the inner city schools, you have sometimes, in Minneapolis or St. Paul, it's over 100 languages that are spoken.
Yes.
And so we need ways to bridge all these different languages and how to reach the kids. And as it turns out, music is a universal language.
Yes.
And what we have found, and this is extraordinary, and I can talk a little bit about this, that when you have K through 5, K through 6, they don't have any preconceptions about music. And so when we have them listen to classical music in the schools, and they have a master listening CD that they have to hear every day with the music that we play. And then, of course, the teachers work with the kids. So when I go in, or when we go in, and I say, okay, we're going to play Romeo and Juliet, kids start clapping before we play.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, it's extraordinary. And
They've learned enough already.
They learned it. And
from your material.
Right, and they like it. And if I say we're going to play Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, same thing. Or if we're going to play music by Mendelssohn or Dvorak or Mozart. And so what that says is that the kids, before they get too old, will accept music for what it is. And when I say, how many like the music? And I said, every hand goes up. Can you imagine? And so that's a thrill. It's amazing.
It is. In addition to music in the schools and the concert series, there are other major offerings. What?
Well, we do. See, the classical series we call our winter concert series and our summer concert series. And then we have a lighter set of concerts called community concerts. And so, especially during the summer, those are out in the parks at Lake Harriet or Como Park. We take them all around, and we do children's concerts. And so those are often during the summer because they sort of dovetail with our music in the schools. So, for instance, we will play one at Weber Park in North Minneapolis this year, and we'll bring in probably 500-600 kids. Some of us tied to the schools, and some of us tied to parents and grandparents bringing their children.
Wow, that's quite a few.
Yeah, well, we will do 65 performances this year. Now, over half of those will be in Minneapolis and St. Paul public schools, but we're also touring. We're going to Greater Minnesota. So this year we are going to Worthington, we're going to Faribault, St. Cloud, Kaikato, and who am I missing? Fairmont.
Good. Well, they are lucky to have you coming.
Well, we're thrilled to go.
I hope the word spreads there about how great this orchestra is.
Well, we hope so. We've been to St. Cloud a couple of times, and the reception we have gotten there is incredible. The excitement, I mean, when I talk to the people who are organizing the concerts in these other cities, the excitement is just palpable. I mean, they are just thrilled. When we go to Worthington and when we go to Faribault, we'll be working with their high school kids. We'll be doing what we call side-by-sides. We'll do 2 rehearsals, and then they will play part of the public concert with us. So, I mean, this is really quite an extraordinary thing. So, for instance, when we go to Worthington, they're going to play Bach's Brandenburg Concerto No. 3 with us. So our concertmaster, Julia Persitz, who's been with us, who's been with me for 39 years.
Wow.
Julia and I will go out to Worthington actually very soon, and we're going to work, just the 2 of us, with their high school orchestra people. We're also going to give a talk called The Magical Mysteries of Music. What's old is new, and what's new is old. Kind of a ambivalent title, and for the right reason. We're going to talk about what this is all about, how we as musicians communicate, how we make music, how we build music, and again, I'll talk there a bit about the importance of classical music to children. The neurological studies on the brain, they take pictures of when kids are listening to classical music.
Imaging?
Imaging, yeah. And what they find is that when they're listening to classical music, certain parts of the brain lights up that was dormant before. And they also have done other studies when kids learn to play instruments, that the parts of the brain get so stimulated that it helps them in their schoolwork, it helps with behavior, and it helps them really come into their own in terms of how they develop. That's all about classical music and playing instruments.
Well, I know classical music is really important, and not only for the young people, but for older people who remember these even when they are disabled to some extent by dementia. It comes alive.
Right. Well, you think about it. Cartoons, Bugs Bunny. Seems to me that was Rossini in the overture, The Barber of Seville. And then I forgot who it was, Daffy Duck, one of those. It was the Liszt's Hungarian Rhapsody. And then, of course, Fantasia, which used Beethoven and Stravinsky. And if you think in terms of advertising on television and you see these commercials. When they try to sell high-end stuff, what do they have in the background? Puccini,
Yes.
and Tchaikovsky.
So tuning into the wholeness of that classical music rather than just the clips with advertising is important.
Oh, yeah, I had a terrific experience at a middle school. Now, we had been going to the school for years. And so K through 6, the kids are just great. 7th graders are getting a little, whatever. 8th graders, well, we're too cool. We don't like this anymore. And I said, now, kids, guys, whatever. I said, you've been with us for 6 years. Things don't just change overnight. You just all of a sudden don't like something. So one of the students came up to me after we got done. He said, Mr. Fishman, I listen to the stuff all the time on public radio. I just can't admit it in front of my friends. That was a great story. I mean, and I got lots and lots of these stories. If we want stories, let me say a couple because I think these are really fun. We were at another middle school and we were doing our math program, showing how math and music are all related. In fact, music is essentially math and how we count and how we phrase and so on and so on. And so I had a kid come up to me, 7th grade, and of course he was about this much taller than me. I mean, it's incredible. He is already well over 6 feet. And he said, Mr. Fishman, I'm a drummer. And I said, that's incredible, because that's exciting. He said, but I never realized the connection between math and music. Now I'm going to pay attention and study my math.
That is a great recognition of something important. So I'm trying to make sure that we cover the many facets.
Right, yeah.
We can't do that in this short program, but the audiences that you have, you've explained in the schools, but now there's another program I understand you have with the McKnight Foundation.
This is a gem. For years, because I'm a composer too, and I do a lot of arranging. And I know how difficult it is, first of all, to get your works rehearsed and played by a good quality orchestra, and then to get paid for that. And so I went to the McKnight Foundation, now this is several years ago, and they put a major focus on individual artists. I said, do me a favor, do us a favor, do your composers a favor. Give us a block grant. So we could do 3 or 4 or 5 commissions every year so that we have some money we can pay the composers. We have some money so we can help rehearse, help to pay for rehearsals for those, and then a bit of money to help administer them. And they thought that that was a really good idea. I was so thrilled. You have no idea. So they gave us a grant, and in fact, they gave us a 2-year grant, something they normally don't do, but they said, we need time, and they knew us, because they had supported us with other programs in the past. And they said, let's start this and see where it goes. And I think we just got renewed for another 2 years. So this is we're finishing our 6th year. So we will have 8 years running. And every year we've been bringing out, on average, 4 new pieces a year by what we call adults. Okay, so these are people who are either well-established composers or starting out in their careers, but they're all Minnesota-based. And then we have one, they weren't particularly interested. They wanted to support people who were really into the field. I said, let's just do a $500 incentive for students 19 and younger, because these are our future composers.
Yes.
And sometimes those are going to work and sometimes they won't. Sometimes you're going to get something really good, and then sometimes you get kids who are not quite there, ready for, But I said, we've got to start.
And certainly the major composers that we often hear began early in life too.
Sure, everybody does. I'm always reminded, there was this thing on public radio, Composer's Almanac. And they always end by saying, remember, all music was new at one time.
Yes.
That's absolutely right. So Beethoven was new at one point. Mozart was new at one point. Elgar. I mean, some of the really greats, and many of them struggled. Dvorak really struggled.
Yes. And so we need this money for the helping composers early on
Right.
get started.
Well, you know, and part of that grant was for me to work with the composers for the pieces that we did not choose, you know, because we just do an all call. And so if we get 10, 12, whatever entries, and I only put 4, then that's several that we don't have. And so I always make the offer, I say, look, if you want to come in and talk about these things, maybe I can give you some thoughts of how I choose what we're going to do, and you can ask me questions with regarding to what you gave us, and maybe that can be helpful. And I've had several composers come in, and I had one very nice letter saying this was one of the most helpful sessions he's ever had. And you know, that's really touching. And it's not, I'm not being egotistical in this sense. What I'm trying to say is that it's important that everybody gets feedback.
Yes.
And sometimes it's helpful. I had one just recently, and I said, you know, my suggestion is take this piece, now that we've talked some, because you've got some real good foundations. Work on it some, and come back to me next year. I said, I make no guarantees, but I'd like to see what you can do.
That is a powerful incentive for a young composer.
Yeah. So,
And yeah, there, your concerts are free admission. So how do you support the organization?
well, you know, if people look at me, they say, well, he doesn't have much hair, and it's all gray. And when I started, I had a lot of hair, and it was all brown. and so you lose that part of it. You lose it by aging, fair enough. But part of it's just because of the constant pressure of trying to raise money to keep this thing going. You know, I justify everything because of what we do for the kids in the schools and the high quality concerts that we present and so on. But there's the second side, and that is raising the money. And you're right, they're free. Or free admission. They're clearly not free. Every time we play a music in the schools, it's $5,500. Every time we play a children's concert, it's $5,500. Every time we play a weekend series of our classical winter concert series, $25,000 to $30,000. And then, of course, you have to pay for management, you have to pay for publicity, and so on, and it goes on and on. And so we ask for contributions. As you mentioned, we're a 501(c). That means we're tax exempt. Although, you know, with the new tax laws, I hate to say it, but, you know.
Check with your accountant.
Yeah, check with your accountant. But the fact of the matter is, we have to rely on the generosity, good graces of our community, foundation support, which is rather interesting too, because some of the major corporate foundations, which have been with us for years, are no longer supporting us. And they're not supporting us not because we're not good. A lot of the money that the foundations use, which is supposed to be for philanthropic reasons, is now being used for marketing.
Really?
And some of them have been very blatant and have said, we use this for marketing purposes. We won't give to an organization unless what they do dovetails with what we do. And it's their money. We don't have any control over that. But for many of the corporations, it's no longer doing good for the sake of doing good. Some of these decisions are very short-sighted because having a really strong arts scene is good for their employees and good for their businesses. And so they have to think longer terms. But again, you know, we're small. We don't have the power. We don't have the financial wherewithal to tell them what to do with their money.
Well, it's supposed to be philanthropic.
Right.
And certainly you qualify for that.
Well, I think the thing is, it's very difficult to market to people who don't have a lot of money. And if you say 35% of your audiences have very little discretionary money, and if you look at the inner city schools, well over half the schools we go to have 90% poverty. Can't market to those people.
No. Oh, that is a very important thing to correct, I think, by the corporations
It is.
in their philanthropic foundations.
We had one, and this came from someone who used to run the foundation who's no longer with the company. The CEO said, we're not going to support that group because it does not come up to the standards of my legacy. That was a corporate CEO.
Uh-oh. There's different values.
Lack of values.
Lack of value. You're right.
Yeah.
So what do we do? We've got 3 minutes to solve the problem.
Well, I will tell your listeners, first of all, please come to our concerts. Come and see what we do. Go to our website. It's listed beneath, but it's www.mnsinfonia.org. That's the Minnesota Sinfonia. Look at the programs. There are pull-down menus. There's one for education. There's one for our composers. There's one for our concerts. See what we do. And then it says how to give to the Minnesota Sinfonia. And people can do online. They can send in contributions. Many people are now putting us in their estate planning. And we are very, very grateful. I mean, I've had people come up to me and say, Jay, I put you in my will. And I have said time and time again, look, we want you to live a happy, healthy, and productive life. When the time comes, the time comes. We all understand that, and for that we're very grateful. But I need you, or it becomes very personal actually when they say, I put you in our will. But I say, we need you to come to concerts. We need you to bring your friends to concerts. One of the best things that people can do is to bring friends, because if everybody likes what they do, the chances are they're going to contribute. For those who have good connections with money, or who have businesses who have money that they can use, by all means, help to sponsor concerts, help to sponsor programs, help to sponsor a school in your community. We'll take music in the schools to the suburbs. We need someone to help pay for that. So if someone says, we want you to come out to XYZ school in my community, and here's the money to pay for it, we will be there in a heartbeat.
Great. Well, maybe that emphasis is part of solving the problem.
It is, and it's called volunteering. People can volunteer with us for many ways if they have time and skills, particularly fundraising skills. Someone should call and say, Jay, let's talk. I might be able to help you. Maybe I'll sit on your board, because I have some connections in the community that if I'm on the board, maybe I can help generate some support money. And of course, we'd be interested in that.
Yeah, these kids are important, and the whole audience you serve are important. And just it's important for those that have resources to help make this continue.
I think so. I think when I was a kid, we had no money. My dad played in the old Minneapolis Symphony before it became Minnesota. My mother was a musician, and there was no money in the family, but we had music.
Yeah.
And we had the values that came along with it. And it's all kind of interconnected, I think. And so when I started this thing, I said, my goodness, I had things that most of these kids don't have. Maybe I can help them, give them things that I just took for granted and that they wouldn't get from any other source.
Yeah. You're right. Thank you, Jay.
You are welcome. Thank you.